And I would like to introduce our speaker as the last few folks come dribbling in. Barbara Sarnecka, PhD, is going to speak to us today on how counting represents what children must learn. And Dr. Sarnecka you're in the Cognitive Sciences Department at UCI. So, Barbara, it's all yours.
I was told I needed to get this microphone down so you could see my face. Is this, can you see my face? Can you hear my voice? So I'll start by telling you that there are 3 kinds of people: those who can count and those who can't. That's my only joke. Yes, that's my only joke. Now I'm a professor, so get ready to be bored. So what I'm going to talk about today is the construction of number concepts. And I'll start out by talking about why you might care about the construction of number concepts. And then I'll give you some definitions of the terms I'm going to use, talk about the process of constructing number concepts, and I'm talking about, in this case, children. You all have number concepts, I assume, but the really interesting number concept construction in terms of the numbers I'm talking about, it happens between about 2 and 4 or 5 years old. So all the data that I'm going to talk to you about are experiments from kids who are about 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the early and partial number concepts that kids have, and then the cardinality principle, which is a really big and important principle that kids have to acquire in order to kind of understand what numbers are. And then maybe one slide at the end on future directions. All right. So first of all, why is this important? Well, if you live in society, I'm going to argue that you should care about early childhood development. At this point, I'm just talking about early childhood development in general. So this is, why should you be interested in programs, for example, that would help 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds who are poor, who don't have a lot of resources, who maybe are in families with just one parent? Why is this of concern to you? Because presumably you don't have 2-year-olds at home anymore, right? And maybe you have grandchildren, or your kids have kids, I guess that would be grandchildren, who are 2 and 3 and 4, but maybe they're fine. Maybe you're thinking, they're all right. They've got families, they've got schools, they're doing fine. Why do I care about why should the public care about investing in early childhood development? Well, it turns out that the cost-benefit ratio of early childhood development programs, just if you look at them as economic development programs, is much better than most other economic development initiatives. So for every $1 that's invested in early childhood development, most economists figure that we get about $3 to $8 back. And here's how we get it back. Kids who have good early childhood development use less special education services in school, and they repeat grades less often. All that stuff costs money to the school system. The child welfare system is used less by kids who had early childhood, by families where there was early childhood intervention. So there's just the treatment and administrative costs of child welfare are lessened. The justice system, kids who have early childhood intervention, so preschool, are arrested less and serve less time in jail. Okay? Kids who have early childhood intervention are less likely to smoke, less likely to have substance abuse problems, and more likely to have private health insurance. So you save a lot of money in the health system by intervening at early childhood. Okay? And kids who have early childhood intervention are more likely to finish high school, more likely to finish college, and they make more money through their whole life until they're 65 or whenever we stop measuring it. So they pay more taxes, right? So if you really want to improve things, even if all you care about is the bottom line and you want to just do some economic development in a community, really you can't get a better deal than early childhood intervention, Right? So that's my little pitch for the importance of early childhood intervention. So moving on to my research specifically, why math? This is my cartoon. Because in a word, early math concepts, early number concepts, pre-kindergarten math skills are the single best predictor of academic achievement through high school. So if you measure kids when they're 5 years old, just starting kindergarten, and you look at their pre-reading skills, their math skills, sort of number skills, like can they do 2 + 3 = 5, that kind of thing. Their attention skills, how well they can sort of sit still and pay attention. Do they have behavior issues? Are they throwing spitballs and poking the kid next to them? Or are they, unwilling to sit still in school? All the stuff you can measure about a 5-year-old. The thing that predicts how well the 5-year-old will do all the way through high school is their early math knowledge. Right? Even if they can't pay attention, even if they're throwing spitballs, even if they don't know how to read, if they have good number concepts when they go into kindergarten, that's the best predictor of how well they'll do all the way through high school. Which of course predicts that you do better in high school, you do better in college, and so forth. Okay? Now, a caveat is we don't know for sure that correlation isn't causation, right? So we don't know for sure that if you intervene and teach them better number concepts that they will do better through high school. It could be that the kids who are more academically inclined just pick up the number concepts when they're 2, 3, 4 years old. But it's worth a try. Right? Okay. So definitions. When I say numbers, I'm particularly today talking about the natural numbers, in other words, positive integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the whole numbers starting with 1 going up. Not talking about rational numbers, fractions, negative numbers, decimals, nothing like that. Nothing fancy. Just the whole exact numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. When I say concept, I mean a mental representation that goes beyond purely sensory information. So some information that you have in your mind about the world that's not just something your eyes or ears will tell you, not just like a sound or a color, but some kind of representation. So concepts have content, meaning what it is that you're representing, what the information is. They have a format. There's some way that the information is stored in your brain. This probably isn't that important for this talk, so you can ignore it if you're bored. And a conceptual role. So concepts can enter into various kinds of calculations, and that's part of how we define what the concept is. So for example, if I have a concept of 5 and I know it's exactly 5 and I can do addition and subtraction, multiplication with 5, then that's part of what defines what the concept is, right? What I can do with it. Can I add it to other numbers? Can I subtract it? That kind of thing. And then when I say construction, like the construction of a concept, I'm talking about a particular type of process called conceptual role bootstrapping. It's also called Quinean bootstrapping after the philosopher Quine. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So here's a quick tutorial on conceptual role bootstrapping. This is a kind of learning process that happens in lots of different domains where you start with a set of placeholder symbols. So so the green boxes are supposed to represent sort of stuff that's in your mind already. Knowledge that you have, maybe you were born with, maybe you have from earlier. And then the white boxes, that S1, S2, S3, S4, S is for symbol. So those are symbols. They're in some kind of structure. They're not connected to anything else you know. So you've acquired some structure. Let's say you know that S3 is connected to S1 and S2, and it's connected to S4, but S4 is not connected to S1 and S2, right? So they have structure in terms of each other. They have connections relative to each other, but they're not connected to anything else you know. So as a very simple example, I was driving the other day last week with my 4-year-old, and he had been watching a cartoon that had pyramids and mummies and ancient Egyptians, and first he explained to me that if someone dies and you put a lot of Band-Aids on them, they will get up and walk around again. That's what that's what he learned from the mummies. And then he asked, what's an ancient Egyptian? So this is an example of this kind of conceptual role bootstrapping, and a very, very simple example, right? He knows enough English at age 4 to know that ancient is a modifier of Egyptian. Like Egyptian is some kind of noun, and ancient is something about it. But that's kind of all he knows. So at this point, ancient Egyptian is kind of like these white boxes with S in them, right? He knows that ancient and Egyptian go together, and that ancient is some kind of Egyptian, and that Egyptians can be ancient. But other than that, he has no idea what it could be. So I could explain to him pretty easily. Now you see my little cartoon shows the boxes are filled in and they're connected to the other. Now it's all greens, right? So now all the knowledge is connected together. I could say to my son, well, Egypt is a place and people who live there are called Egyptians, and ancient means a long time ago. So ancient Egyptian was things were people that were in Egypt a long time ago. So it's pretty easy for me to connect those placeholders to stuff he already knows. He knows what a place is. He knows what it means to say a long time ago. And so now the resulting system that he has, it includes ancient Egyptian, but it's connected to stuff he used to know. And so he's got more representational power now. Now he can represent information about ancient Egyptians. He couldn't do that before, right? If I had said to him a month earlier, this coin was owned by an ancient Egyptian, that didn't mean anything to him, right? But now I say this coin was owned by an ancient Egyptian, and he can think, oh, it was owned by someone in Egypt a long time ago, right? So this is kind of a simple kind of illustration of how bootstrapping would work. First you acquire the symbol, it doesn't mean anything, then it gets filled in with meaning. Okay. So in the case of number, there's a whole bunch of innate conceptual cognitive systems that are relevant to number that are in your brain already. Some examples, parallel individuation is the ability to pay attention to multiple things at once, but it's not really a number system. The big one at the bottom here is I guess I'll try the pointing. I hate pointers. The approximate number system. That is a number system, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but it can't do integers. It can't do natural number, and I'll tell you why in a second. Natural language quantification, there are some quantificational resources in language. So, for example, when you speak, you make a distinction between singular and plural. You're marking the difference between one and more than one. Some languages have dual markers. Some languages have trial markers that mark 1, 2, 3, plural. In order to acquire language, you have to have the ability to make those distinctions between 1 and 2 and 3 and more than that. So that's sort of a number-related system. And then set-based quantification is another example. Babies can track up to about 3 things at once, but they can't track 4. They just forget. So if you put sort of 3 balls in a box and then you take 2 out, the baby will stick its hand in and start looking for the other one, right? Which is evidence that they remember that there were 3. But if you put 4 balls in a box and the baby takes 1 out, they stop looking, right? Which is evidence that once you get to 4, they just go, I can't remember, right? So that's the parallel individuation system. You can remember things 1 at a time up to about 3. But set-based quantification lets you chunk things, lets you move things into categories and remember more. So if you put 2 cars in the box and 2 bunnies in the box, the baby can remember that, right? They can remember 2 cars and 2 bunnies, even though it's 4, right? So if there were just absolutely the limit on 3, then they couldn't do it. But if you divide it into groups that are smaller than 3, then it seems they can remember 1 level of hierarchy, cars and bunnies, and within each one, 2 cars, 2 bunnies, like that. So set-based quantification is another kind of cognitive resource that you can use to kind of process number information. Okay. But none of these can do numbers, right? None of these can do natural number. None of these can represent like 27. If I wanted to communicate somehow that there were 27 people in this room, if I asked you, any person, to go out in the hall and tell somebody, make somebody understand exactly how many people are in this room, like let's say there's 27, and you're not allowed to use the word 27 or write the number 27, what would you do? I mean, you just can't, None of these systems can do large, exact numbers. They can do differences between maybe 1 and 2, 2 and 3, maybe up to 6 with the set-based stuff. The approximate number system can do approximate numbers. So I can look in the room and say, maybe there's about 40 people here. But the difference between 40 and 41, I can't see. Right? So the cognitive systems that you have in your mind before you learn the linguistic number system, number, words, and counting, are not powerful enough or exact enough to do the positive integers. They can't represent that information accurately enough. Just like you can't see the molecular structure of that bar stool by just looking at it. Our perceptual capacity is not that good. Right? So you need stuff from the outside. You need a microscope to look at the bar stool, and in numbers you need number words from your language and a counting routine. Okay. So the placeholders in the case of number are the words themselves, the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they get filled in gradually with meaning, and that's how we get number concepts. That's what I'm going to talk about. All right, so to make this point, again, that I just made, the innate systems aren't enough. The two big candidates that you might think could do number would be either the parallel individuation system, this one, or the other one. So first, I'll talk about this one. Parallel individuation is important. It lets us pay attention to things, multiple things at the same time. But there's no symbol for an integer in this system. There's no symbol for the number. So it's the little cartoon I've drawn here shows that, if you're looking at a lemon and a strawberry, you actually have to have a symbol in your mind for each thing. You need 3 symbols in your mind to look at 3 objects, to individuate 3 objects. There's no symbol for 3, right? There's no 3 on there. And what that means is that the more things you're looking at, the more symbols you have to keep in your mind. And so there are limits on working memory to how many things you can individuate. So the way I think about it sometimes is if you take some kids to a park or a playground and you have to watch them, let's say you take 3 kids and they're running around on a park with all the other kids, you got to watch those 3 kids, right? You can't just like pick 3 kids and go home when it's time to go home, right? Like you can't just keep in your mind like 3. I brought 3, right? You have to actually individuate. You have to actually track each individual and make sure you bring home the exact individuals that you took to the park. So that's parallel individuation. And because there's no, if you had a symbol for 3, then you could represent 3 as easily as you could represent 300 because it's just one symbol. But it doesn't work that way. And so you can't take 5 kids to the park, 6 kids, 8 kids. You can't watch them all, right? There's a limit to how many things you can watch at the same time. That's why the parallel individuation system isn't enough to support integer concepts, because you need a symbol in your mind for everything you're looking at, and you can only keep like 3 or 4 symbols in your mind. Okay. So again, if I wanted to talk about 27 people being in this room, I couldn't use the parallel individuation system. Not enough. I can't watch 27 people. Okay. The approximate number system is the other number system. This is really the only kind of innate number system that humans and other animals have. It's just an estimation system. And everything has it. Rats, monkeys, pigeons. Every animal with a nervous system basically has an approximate number system. But it can't do integers because it's not exact enough. So one of those pictures is 24 strawberries and one is 28 strawberries, and you probably can't tell which one, right? Yeah? I don't even know. I think the one on the right has 28. But the point is that you have in your mind, this is an analog magnitude system. So you have one symbol in your mind for the number, and the symbol gets bigger as the number gets bigger. But it's not exact enough to tell the difference between something like 2010 and 2011. Right? There's no symbol for an exact number in this system. So again, this system is good, but it's just an approximate system. What we're born with is an approximate number system, but it can't support things like, addition and subtraction, exact addition and subtraction, or multiplication and division with exact numbers. It's not precise enough. You guys all see that, yep? Okay. Okay, so the placeholders are the number words and the counting routine. You should probably go by the movie now. So first kids learn the words themselves, and they first learn it as an unbroken chain, typically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They don't even realize that it's separate words at the beginning. And then with a little more practice, they learn that these are different words that could be separable. They learn to sort of start in the middle of the list and count up, start in the middle of the list and count backwards, stuff like that. And they learn rules of counting, like you have to point to each thing once and only once. You have to say the words in the same order. You can't count anything twice. You can't skip anything. So if they know all that, you know, if you take a 3-year-old or 4-year-old and you show them a row of things and say, how many apples are on this table? Chances are pretty good that they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you think, great, the kid knows how to count, so why am I calling them placeholders? I mean, what do they not know that is making me say that these are placeholders, right? Okay, so here's an example, if you could show the video. Go ahead. Oh, can we pause it? Can you go back? Because I think they didn't get to hear the initial command. So this is a researcher in my lab, and she's asking the child to give a certain number of, I think they're oranges, little plastic oranges, to the stuffed animal. Okay? Can we hear it again?
Can you give him 5?
So she asked for 5. And the child knows how to count. They appear to count correctly. So she said, is that 5? And then she's...
Can you fix it so there's 5?
So you all saw that? She counted out 8, she counted correctly, and then the experimenter said, can you fix it so there's 5? And she added more, right?
Is that 5? Yay!
Okay.
Thank you.
And whenever the child says, yes, that's 5, we say, yay! We don't tell them, no, it's not. Okay. Okay, so this is an example of the kind of counting behavior. This is the kind of counting behavior that you see routinely. Kids learn the words, they know the list, they look like they know how to count, right? They're pointing to everything and they didn't skip anything, and the girl went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the experimenter said, is that 5? And she went, yes. And she said, I don't think it is. Can you fix it so it's 5? And what did the kid do? She added more, right? So it really looks like these are placeholders. They have learned to say the words, they have learned to point and say the words and count, but they don't understand what they're doing. And it's understanding what you're doing that really involves some big conceptual issues. And those are what I study. And I'm going to try to give you a sense today of kind of what things kids need to learn. So what we find when we do this task, this give-end task that I just showed you on the video, is that kids' performance falls into discrete sort of stages. So first, kids are what we call one-knowers, which means that they'll give you, if you ask for one thing, they'll give you 1, and if you ask for any other number, they will give you just some random, like a handful. They just grab a handful and stick them out there. But they won't give you 1. So they know that 1 means 1, and other than that, they don't know. Then they become 2-knowers. So they'll give you 2 if you ask for 2, and they'll give you 1 if you ask for 1, but other than that, they don't know. They'll just grab. Then 3-knowers, they learn what 3 means, learn what 4 means. So these are sort of discrete stages where they know 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And those 1, 2, 3, and 4-knower stages I might refer to as subset knowers, because they can count up to 10 or higher, but they only know the meanings, the actual cardinal meanings of a subset of those words, either 1 or 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3 and 4, so we call those subset knowers. So after the subset knowers, after the 3-knower level or the 4-knower level, they figure out what's called the cardinality principle. And one way to think of it is, it's just the principle that when you count, the last word you say tells the number of things in the whole set. But it's really deeper than that. Because it's also, basically when you figure out the cardinality principle, what you're figuring out is that every number plus 1 makes the next number. So you understand that 4, if you're a 4-knower, you know what 4 means. And then the cardinality principle is the point, when you figure out the cardinality principle, that's the point where you figure out that, oh, 5 is the next word in the list. And so 5 must be the number of objects you get if you've got 4 and you add 1. So it's figuring out that the next word in the list means adding an item to the set of objects, right? And once you've understood that, this is huge. Right? Then you understand how numbers work. Then you understand what 2010 means. 2010 means the number of things you would have if you counted from 1 to 2010 and added 1 item with every number word. Right? It gives you a way of understanding what all the number words mean, what their cardinal meanings are. And it's a really important conceptual breakthrough. So, so it also sort of, it happens at that point, it's a kind of a freeing thing, because up through 4, because of parallel individuation, through 3 or 4, you don't actually have to understand the cardinality principle in order to learn what 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 mean. Because you can track 3 things. You can track maybe up to 4 things by the time you're 3 or 4 years old. So you don't need to understand how numbers work in order to learn that 2 means 2. You can represent 2 without that rule. Okay? So the cardinality principle is the principle that you need in order to understand numbers above 4. Okay, so these knower levels, we see 1 knowers, 2 knowers, 3 knowers, 4 knowers. Right here I've got what are called pre-knowers. Those are kids who don't even know what 1 means yet. This is an example of some data. I'm just showing you the ages of the kids who fall at the different levels, and you can see there's a correlation with age. Kids obviously start at the beginning and then they go through the stages in order. So on average, the kids at the later stages are older. But there's enough individual variation that, for example, if you look at 3.5-year-olds, I've drawn a line at 42 months old, which is 3.5, an individual 3.5-year-old child could really fall in any of those stages. So we don't report our results just by age. We don't say 3-year-olds know this and 4-year-olds know that. Because there's such big individual variation that it makes a lot more sense to say 2 knowers do this, 3 knowers do that, cardinal principle knowers do this. Okay? So that's why I'm going to tell you when I report findings, I'll always be saying, oh, subset knowers failed, cardinal principle knowers succeeded. That's because just talking about their ages doesn't tell you very much. Okay. Yeah.
As seniors get older and they go, 1 and 2 and they're going backwards, okay, does that mean we're losing it?
I don't know what you mean, 1 and 2 and going backwards? Okay. All right. So I'll show you some. I'll show you some studies. It looks like I'm going much more slowly than I expected, so I'll maybe skip some of the boring studies here. So here's an example of a study that we did where we did the give-n task with kids, and then we also tested their expressive vocabulary and their receptive vocabulary. So expressive vocabulary is when we point to a picture and ask them what it's called. Receptive is when we ask them to, when we say, show me the bicycle or the balloon, and they have to point to it. Okay, so speaking, being able to produce the words versus being able to understand the words. What we find is that children's number knower level is very highly correlated with their vocabulary. So kids who are learning language faster, who know more language, also know more numbers. Okay. So that's one thing that's sort of interesting to us, because language knowledge and math knowledge isn't necessarily related for older kids. But it looks like in preschool, when they're first acquiring this system, language is a really important medium of acquisition. So the better their language skills are, the better the earlier they're learning the number concepts. Okay. Here's a study that I did with Susan Gelman. That's a picture. Oh, I should tell you, these little pictures at the top are collaborators. That's my graduate student, James Nagin. This was my graduate advisor at the University of Michigan, Susan Gelman. So here's a study where we had a box, and we put 5 things in the box, and I would say to the child, okay, I'm putting 5 things in this box, and then I would close the lid. How many things? And the child would say 5. And then I would say, good, now watch. And I would either shake up the box or turn it around or take something out or put something in. And then I would say, okay, now how many? Is it 5 or 6, for example? And we found that even one-knowers would say that if I shook the box or rotated it or lined up the objects or stirred them around with a spoon, then if it used to be 5, it's still 5. They knew the number word didn't change. These are kids who don't know what 5 means, right? They're one-knowers. But if I added an object or took an object away, then they thought that the number word changed. So it looks like from very early on, they have some sense that these numbers might be labels for specific quantities, but they're not sure how the label is matched up to the quantity. Here's a study with Emily Slusser, who's a grad student here of mine who just finished her PhD last week, and she's going to Wesleyan for a postdoc. She wanted to know when children understand that number is a property of only discontinuous quantities. So, for example, there's some number of marbles there, but you can't really say there's some number of blue creamy stuff, right? So she did this study where we would show kids 2 cups, and these are representations of the different trials. A cup with some amount of liquid in it or powder, and a cup with some discrete objects in it. And we'd either say which cup has green, or we'd say which cup has 5. And so for which cup has green, the right answers are circled. For which cup has 5, the right answers would be those. Okay. What we find is that which cup has green, all the kids do fine. Even the pre-knowers right here are above chance. Chance is 50% because, right, you're choosing between, you've got 2 cups in front of you, and if you just choose at random, you're going to get it right 50% of the time. So the origin of the graph is 50%. You see that everybody does great when we ask them which cup has green. But when we ask which cup has 5, they still surprisingly do really well. The pre-knowers don't. The pre-knowers are not different from chance. So that bar is the error bar. It shows that they are within the margin of error. They might just be guessing. But all the other groups, even the one-knowers, pick out the discrete objects when you ask them which cup has 5. So from very early on, another thing that they've sort of figured out is that number is about discrete objects, right? Kind of interesting. But there's still a big jump, right? From 1 and 2 knowers up to 3 and 4 knowers is still a leap, all right? Then we wondered what would happen in languages that don't have such count-mass distinctions as English, because you think, well, maybe the English-speaking kids understand that number is about discrete objects because we have count syntax in English. When we talk about discrete objects, we usually use count nouns. So we'll say like cups or apples or chairs or, shoes. And when we talk about substances, we often use mass syntax, like water, a bunch of flour, a bunch of sand, okay? But not all languages do that. Some languages don't have count mass syntax. So Emily did this study with Mandarin Chinese speakers. In that case, we say which one has 5 g, which is a numeral classifier. And they did fine when we had the classifier. So saying 5 g is like saying 5 of them, 5 things. But when we took the classifier away, then in order to make it grammatical in Chinese, we had to say, I'm thinking of a word. You tell me which cup goes with this word. Ready? 5. Okay, you can't say just which cup has 5 in Chinese like you can in English. When we did it that way, they didn't do well. So the Chinese-speaking kids, when they were pre-knowers, there's only 3 kids there, so we don't know. But the subset knowers, 33 of them in this sample, were at chance. And not until they figured out the cardinality principle did they start to succeed on this task where they had to match the word 5 to discrete objects. So it's suggestive of an English-Mandarin difference, but the methods weren't identical. So we need to go back now and do it. We need to say in English, I'm thinking of a word. Can you tell me which cup goes with this word? Ready? 5. And we need to go back in Mandarin and do it exactly the way we did it in English to find out if there's really a language difference. All right. And now I'll just talk a little bit about what kids know when they figure out the cardinality principle. So for a long time, I think people thought of this as a fairly simple rule. They said you count, and the last word you say when you count means how many things there are. But I think I can show you some data here to really show that it's a really big conceptual breakthrough, and that there are a lot of sort of big concepts that come along with understanding the cardinality principle. Okay, so this is Susan Carey, my postdoc advisor at Harvard. We did this work together. One thing about understanding the cardinality principle is understanding that the direction of mapping between the number word lists and set sizes is forward more, backward less. So as you go forward in the number list, the sets get bigger. As you go backward in the number list, the sets get smaller. That's something you have to understand in order to understand the cardinality principle. So we did this, And the second thing you have to understand is that the unit of mapping is exactly one word to one item. So every time you go forward one word, you got to add one item. It's not like add 1, add 2, add 3, something like that. Okay? So here we did this task where we would show the child 2 plates of things and say, for example, okay, I'm putting 6 blocks on this plate and 6 blocks on this plate, and now I'll move one. Now there's a plate with 5 and a plate with 7, and I'm going to ask you about the plate with 7. Are you ready? Which plate has 7? And we found that basically the subset knowers, pre-knowers, 2 knowers, 3 knowers, they were all at chance. The 4 knowers and CP knowers were just a little bit above chance. So just when they're either when they figured out the cardinal principle or when they're just getting ready to figure out the cardinal principle, do they grasp this concept of forward in the list means more stuff and backward in the list means less stuff. All right. Then the task to assess their understanding of the units, we would say, I'm putting 5 erasers into the box. How many erasers? The child would say 5. Good, now watch. And then we'd either add 1 eraser or 2 more erasers and say, okay, now how many? Is it 6 or 7? This is just to try to find out whether they understand that if you add 1 eraser, it's 6. If you add 2 erasers, it's 7. Right? This one, they all failed except for the cardinality principle knowers. So really, this seems to be a big part of the cardinality principle. Understanding the direction of mapping and the unit of mapping is really key to understanding how number words can mean set sizes. Okay? Here's another experiment. Susan Gelman and Charles Wright, Ted Wright here at UCI were my collaborators. In this experiment, we'd say, okay, I'm going to tell you a story about when Frog and Lion came to my house and I gave them some snacks. And I tried to make sure their snacks were the same because they like their snacks to be exactly the same. But sometimes I made a mistake and their snacks were not the same. So I want you to look at their snacks and tell me if I did it right or if I made a mistake. So here's Frog's snack and here's Lion's snack. And the children were very good at saying that I made a mistake in this case. In half the cases, they were identical. In half the cases, they were different by 1, like you see here. They'd say, you made a mistake. Look, oh, look right there. You forgot a peach there. And I'd say, oh, I'm so silly. I can't believe I forgot one. And then we'd say, okay, Frog has 6 peaches. Does Lion have 5 or 6? What do you think? And here are the results. This is the age to show you that the kids at higher knower levels were definitely older. But here are the results by knower level. Pre-knowers, 1 knower, 2 knower, 3 knower, 4 knower, CP knower. So up until the time that they understood the cardinality principle, they didn't have any idea whether these 2 sets that they're looking right at, that they have just told me are not the same, might have the same number or not. Okay. Here's another representation of the same data. C is for cardinality principle knower, and these are the individual kids. So the 1 knowers, 2 knowers, 3 knowers, 4 knowers, and pre-number knowers are down here. And as you can see, it's a really kind of amazing finding. There's just nothing in between. All the subset knowers are down here. All the CP knowers are up here. And age is on the x-axis. So you can see there's some overlap in the age. But whether they know the cardinality principle or not really predicts whether they succeed on this task. So it looks like their understanding of one-to-one correspondence being the basis of numerical equality is very tied to their understanding of the cardinality principle. Okay, last study, words for numbers. We would say this picture has 4 turtles. Show me another picture with 4 turtles. And we would have the alternative picture here controlled so that it had the same area as the target or the same contour length as the target. Sometimes it had the same color, something like that. So in this case, that's the right answer over there. That's the wrong answer. Sometimes we would say, ask them to match the pictures on the color of the items or the mood of the items. So we'd say, pick another picture with orange turtles or another picture with happy turtles. So this one is, the correct answer is this one where they're orange, but you can see that the wrong answer matches the target in mood. They're happy. So if you matched happy with happy, then you'd get the wrong answer. Okay? So we'd say that mood is a distractor in this trial. All right, so for the color and mood trials, the pre-number knowers did not do so well, but the subset knowers and the CP knowers all did great. So if we asked them to show me orange turtles, show me happy turtles, they were fine. But when we look at the number trials, they didn't do well at all. The CP knowers could match on number, but the subset knowers and pre-number knowers could not. In fact, they were significantly below chance, indicating that they continued to match on the distractor. So if they just had no idea and they were guessing, they'd be at 50%, but they were below 50%. And I think what happened here is that we said, show me some orange turtles, great, I know how to do that. Show me some happy turtles, yes, I know how to do that. Show me another picture with 5 turtles, I have no idea, but I'll just match the happy ones again, right? Okay. So if we make number the only possible match, so that here's happy orange turtles, and we've got sad green turtles on both sides, but here's 4 sad green turtles, and here's 8 sad green turtles. This is matched for area or contour length, and this is matched for number. Then they're just basically at 50%. So if they've got no color or mood to match on, then they're just guessing. They have no idea. Again, until they figure out the cardinality principle of counting. They don't even know what dimension of experience these number words are referring to. Okay. So I've shown you all these kinds of studies about what kids learn when they learn the cardinality principle, all these really big concepts. Basically, for the Chinese kids, the idea that numbers are a property of discrete, discontinuous quantities, the idea of the mapping, going the direction of the mapping and the unit of the mapping between number words and set sizes, the idea that one-to-one correspondence is the basis for the numerical equality of sets, and just identifying the dimension of experience that number words are talking about, knowing what it is for something to be 5 versus 10, that you're talking about how many there are. Okay. So hopefully I've convinced you that there's a lot of big conceptual development going on in this domain at this age. And so the future directions, what I'm about to start now is a Head Start study with Orange County Head Start, because we actually find really big differences between high-income kids and low-income kids in the age at which they're doing this. I actually, when I started out doing this research, I didn't think it was relevant to education, because the kids that I deal with are typically pretty high-income kids whose parents really have it together and are bringing them into university laboratories to be participants in experiments. And I can tell you as the parent of young children that if you can actually get yourself organized to make an appointment with a university lab and take your kid in there for an experiment, it means that things are going pretty well in your life. And we actually find, okay, can I have 1 minute to finish? I'm on my last slide. We actually find that kids from low-income families might not have these concepts in place by the time they start kindergarten or even first grade. So we see kids in kindergarten and first grade who don't understand the cardinality principle. Now, I've just shown you what a huge thing the cardinality principle is. My kids, I can tell you, and probably your kids and grandkids, understood this when they were 2.5 or 3 years old. I know because I'm a number researcher and I was doing with this stuff, doing the experiments with them in the bathtub at home because I was curious about whether they understood it. That both of my sons understood this by the time they were 2.5 or 2 years and 10 months or something. And in our lab, we typically see it by 3.5 across a broad range of high-income kids. Low-income kids might not understand this when they're 5, when they're 6, because nobody's counting with them. And that causes huge problems for them in school. Okay, so we're doing 4 groups of children. The focus is on low-income bilingual kids whose first language is Spanish. We're doing an intervention in Spanish and English and pre-testing and post-testing them in both Spanish and English to find out what their conceptual change is and in addition to the language learning. And then we've got 3 control groups: middle-income Spanish-English speakers, low-income English monolinguals, and middle-income English monolinguals. Okay, and the intervention we're doing is just a simple linear board game. It's kind of like playing Chutes and Ladders, except that it just goes from 1 to 10. You spin a spinner and you move either one space or two spaces and you count. You say, okay, I'm on space 3. I spun the thing. I got a 2, so I go 4, 5, and whoever gets to 10 first is the winner. And believe it or not, some research has shown that this kind of intervention, if you play this game maybe for 15 minutes, once a week for 4 weeks, massively improves their number understanding. All right, thank you. This is my lab, my collaborators. These are all my students who did all the research that I was showing you.